A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Resuming our continuous tracking of India's electric vehicle journey, the roadblocks and speed breakers, switching to a green commute, steering the change, pushing the boundaries. Those are the defining factors that we're looking at this afternoon as we resume our session 3 and 4 lined up for you. A lot to discuss still. Before we commence our third session, let me also take this opportunity to thank all our sponsors for their continuing support and assistance. TVS Eurogrip, Kia Seltos, Kansai and Nerolac Paints Limited, ACO General Insurance, ARB Bearings, Bandhan Bank, KLJ Paraflex, RR Cable, the ACA Group, and EESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited. Thank you very much to all our event sponsors for their assistance. Here, a reminder also that Wion World is One is your continuing destination for the on-air coverage of the Wion EMobility Summit, bringing all the stakeholders together under one roof. Can India lead the e-revolution? What is the support required to fast-track India's green commute? As we map the future of electric vehicles in India, it is my absolute pleasure to invite the panelists for our next session coming up that focuses on startups in the electric vehicle space, a very important element here as we continue our discussions forward. Joining us for that very special session here is Parveen Karb, CEO 22 Motors, requesting all the panelists to please come up on stage. Mr. Karb. Also joining us, Vineet Bansal, founder and managing director, EV Motors India Private Limited. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, please. Also joining us, Ayush Lohia, CEO Lohia Auto Industries, Saurav Kumar, founder and CEO Euler Motors, and Aditya Goyal, co-founder and CEO Inverted Energy, Piyush P. Gupta, CEO Lithion. Mr. Goyal is just joining us. Also, just a reminder, the moderator for our session, Wion's Karthiki Sharma. Appreciate you joining us and welcome you on stage. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Molly. And soon we'll be joined by Aditya Goyal also. I think it's because of the bad traffic, that's all we know in Delhi. So a little wait of 5 minutes for him, but we'll start the session. And I think in the second part, the most important component is the issue of startup. And when we talk about emerging technologies, frontier sciences, or the business which impact the future in long term, I think EVs play a very important role. They actually tell us the health of the ecosystem. If we look at the contributions of Silicon Valley, we know how American hegemony perpetuates through young, bright mind companies which succeed and fail, but ultimately their contribution to the economy and the world at large is all there to see. But, I'll straight away start with a pointed question. And to you, what is the real issue which is really ailing our startups in India when it comes to electronic vehicles? Because ultimately, if we see the larger picture, China dominates the supply chain, they dominate the hardware, they have a position in software, they own the mines in Congo, they have stakes in Bolivia and Chile. So when it comes to the bigger architecture of EVs, we have Chinese everywhere. To you.
So that's a very interesting question. Just as a background, I work for Lithion Power. It's a 3-year-old company, and we are developing omni-charging infrastructure for low and medium-powered electric vehicles. I think I would not say what ails these startups. I think what can we do better is to essentially make sure the progress is faster. The single biggest thing in my view is that we are just too much dependent on external technology. There's not much investment in a new product development that is happening inside India. if you look at what defines electric vehicle industry in India, it's essentially two-wheelers and three-wheelers. We have around, and I'm not kidding, we have close to 2 million electric vehicles in India. And I'm again not kidding. Not even a single motor, not even a single controller, not even a single lithium-ion battery pack full of components has any single Indian component in it. Yeah, we've been completely dominated by imports, and for new companies to break into that ecosystem and start competing on day one against imports from a much more established ecosystem, it becomes difficult. Yeah, it's not impossible. It takes time for anyone to develop a product. A product development is somewhere between a 3 to 5 year process, whether you're making a small product or a large product, right? Especially when you're starting from a ground zero, where you have actually no support in this Indian ecosystem for a new product development, right? It is harder. And then you're starting competing against imports which are coming in from a fairly stable supply chain. I think in my view, that's the single biggest problem.
Is it because of the lack of sort of the culture of startup? Or is it because of the fact that the sort of synergy which we have seen in the Chinese environment, whereby the Chinese state cooperates with private companies, invests in technology, then owes it up, and then starts producing it? I'll give you an example. Chinese were way behind in manufacturing of the high-speed trains. Over a period of time, they started producing better trains than Japan. That's the Chinese way. Is it because of that?
So I think, so just for introduction, sort of with Euler Motors, we're a startup 1.5 year into the electric vehicle journey. I think from when we started thinking about electric vehicle, India was still not building majority of the main component, which was your powertrain or battery packs. There were talks, and at least most of the companies were thinking about it, but none of these could still compete with what Japanese or the Chinese or the European company had built. So you had no choice to go with the product or the solution that existed. But having said that, I think there is a lot of opportunity which is very, very, I think, unique to India, and hence there will be a lot of things that will be built from India for the Indian community, and be it the industry, be it the consumer or enterprise or anything. And then because Indian automotive segment is pretty big, you can also have a leadership opportunity in terms of export. Now, whether startup, this collaboration and like how would startup will form its businesses. See, when a startup builds something and we go to our customers, they don't look at us and say, okay, you're a startup and hence I will cut you a slack. They look at you and they'll be like, okay, if I'm going to pay $1 for your vehicle, I expect it to behave similarly what other OEM would also work at. So matching that expectation is very difficult for a startup, especially when you don't have that much of resource, energy or manpower or cash or all of that. So I think one is that. The second is also the sentiment that I believed, which was largely responsible for like a growth for startups. So when people are thinking about investing in your company, be it the investors, or let's just say you want talent to switch from other industry and join you, they look at this thing that, okay, how much time is this startup going to, will this segment take off? Will it take like 5 years? Will it take 10 years? If it takes 5 years, will I get my IRR and all sort of those things. So especially now we see sentiment and some of that stabilizing, and when that stabilizes, I think you will have more startup coming up. They will be investing in new technologies, starting building up, working with the ecosystem. And third is your end customer, right? The end customer also right now does not have a very good understanding of what EV means for their business. They have read about Tesla, they have read about NIO, they have read about BYD, they have read about all successful stories. But when you apply them to Indian context, a lot of that changes from cost of ownership, from cost of upfront cost or subsidies, all of that. So when all of this, I think, merges, and that's where I think that actually makes sense. I think
that's a very important point you raised. What does EV mean for a customer? When you buy a big car, you know what a 2-liter turbo diesel engine would give you. It's going to give you a rush. When you go for an e-platform or electronic vehicle, what is it supposed to give you? Is it supposed to give you rush? Is it about cleaner and smarter cities? Or is it about the fact that the fossil fuels are not going to be here for long? Or is it about the fact that there is a shift in technology, automobile technology, and the EV is the future? Vineet.
Yeah, my name is Vineet Bansal with EV Motors. We are focused on charging infra and battery technology here for promoting e-mobility. To answer your question, I think one of the things that in terms of from an e-mobility, excuse me, could you just repeat that question again?
So what does EV should mean for a customer? When we talk about startups, for example, Tesla, or for example, any other company which makes an electronic car in America, it means that, less maintenance, less noise, less moving parts, Or for example, it means that, you're working around a cleaner city, less emissions. Yeah. So in India, what does EV mean for? Because our market is diverse, it's far more complex, it's bigger, divided into urban-rural segments, and we have different priorities. India is a different country altogether.
Right. So I think what, from a customer's perspective, the EV should look at multiple things. One, it has a better performance. One of the things, the reason EV has become popular is because of Tesla and what Tesla offers as a sports or roadster. So performance is one of the things that EV brings from an automotive perspective, is one of the disruption of the technology. Obviously, it is from an environment perspective, environment friendly, zero emission tailpipe. So that's also another important thing. And another thing from a customer's perspective, right now the important thing is people are looking at it as a highly expensive solution from an automotive. But I think realistically it is, if you look at a total cost of ownership, it is still very affordable at this point of time. And that's one of the reasons why today EV is more being adopted in India, more in the commercial segment. And I think when you talk about EVs, you're looking at both commercial segment as well as individuals. So on the commercial segment side, EV is cost effective. There is definitely a business case around it. When we talk about individuals, it's about performance, and it's about a pleasure driving machine that you need to have. So.
Ayush, before I come to you, let me also welcome Mr. Aditya Goyal, co-founder and CEO Inverted Energy. Thank you for being part of our forum. But to you, we were speaking about what are the requirements when it comes to startups in India, and what does electronic vehicle should mean to an Indian. But can you take us through this whole argument that subsidy is really required for startups? Do you think that startups require subsidy? EVs in Indian context are being too much dependent on government subsidies?
So frankly speaking, if you see from the international perspective, startups, we see supports coming in from all the aspects, whether you talk about government, whether you talk about industrial or the institution. They definitely promote startups, but not in form of direct subsidy. It is all indirect, whether and those kind of support you find in India also happening. Whether you go to IIT, whether you go to IIMs, you will find support in where whether the professors, whether the institutions, they support and help the new startups to evolve the product from the technology perspective. The major challenge what they face is to grow from a perspective when they have evolved on a technology and they want to scale it up to the next level. There they face challenges where they don't know how to manufacture, about the processes, marketing, and all those kind of challenges they face once they reach to a next level after the product evolution is concerned. And the second most challenge they face is they don't know what kind of process or the testing parameters they need to go through, because India is a very different environment. You will find temperature as low as 0 degrees Celsius, near about 0 degrees Celsius in North India. Then you have the complete summers which run above 40 degrees, almost 9 months a year. Then you have rainy season, you will find knee above water floating everywhere. So designing a product for that kind of climate conditions is not that easy. And once you don't do a run-through testing of the product, whether it is any automotive-related product or anything, individually from the motor perspective, the controller perspective, or the battery pack, you really are not going to survive in the market, because the products what we are talking about are new. Technology is new. Our customer behavior is very different. They expect, like I can share my perspective, that when we started, the customer was competing from the gasoline vehicles at that point of time. They don't understand, they understand that the vehicle is designed to commute, not only to commute, but also to, have load. So they don't differentiate between an IC vehicle or an electric vehicle. They expect the same output to come from an electric vehicle also. So those kind of challenges and abusive conditions which we find in Indian consumers are very different. Rather, I'll put it this way, that the customer expectation from a product is far higher than you expect it from anywhere else in the country. That's why we say in automotive segment, anything proven on Indian road is best product you can think of across the globe. So those kind of challenges what we face in a startup is missing because of the experience and the kind of synergy they feel out of the product, out of the box. When we design a product, we evolve a product, and then we put it on road before we reach to actual consumer. Or
Aditya, just to join into this debate, earlier when the Transport Minister Nitin Gadkari was here, there were a lot of questions on the goalposts being shifted. The earlier the government wanted a lot of EVs to be in the market. Then suddenly there is a push that the range should be extended. So is it because of the changing regulations and different priorities coming at different point of time, which has created a challenge for the startups in the country?
So in terms of what we face while we're developing batteries is there's a huge disconnect in India just in terms of innovative culture. So you talk about any product which has been created in India, you would find that there are very, very few products which are innovative that come out of India. And we personally have tried for, I think, the last year and a half to work closely with the IITs. Being alumni of the institute, obviously we have an advantage, but there's a huge disconnect just in the alignment of incentives. So, you go to an IIT Delhi, you go to any of these institutes, and you tell the professors that you want to develop a product. The people that are there working on PhDs are not incentivized to develop any product. They're incentivized to come out with papers, to publish papers. So they're not very tuned to what the market realities are. So you look at any countries abroad, so you talk to the US, you talk Europe, you talk about academic researches that happen. In India, everything is practical, and what we eventually have to do is take a product which is probably made overseas, get it to India and try and customize it, which is why we're always behind what the curve is. In terms of the government changing the goalposts and increasing the mileage, I think it's just an understanding of where we can get that push from. Because internationally, we're about a good 5 to 7 years behind what all the other countries are. So while we're trying to, talk about having two-wheelers be 100% of our e-mobility, or having 100% of market share by 2030 in all new vehicles sold, it's a very difficult target. So what the government, I think, is trying to do is trying to ensure that we get adoption from any one of the markets, where commercial is probably the most easy market to adopt these vehicles, because there is a clear economic case study or a scenario.
So you're basically saying that there's an academic disconnect between the industry, market, and those who can pioneer new technologies.
Definitely. That's what we felt while we're trying to develop batteries that are usable by, market for India.
I think Piyush, you want to come in?
I think Aditya has a good point there. The whole culture of innovation does not exist, right? So, 20 years ago I came out from IIT, and it's very shameful for me to say, but I had not done anything innovative, or I had not even thought about doing anything innovative when I was at IIT. Yeah, it still exists. Yeah.
Vinit? Yeah, I think one of the things I also want to mention, Indian culture is driven a lot by commercial. Solve a problem. So the question is, how what I have seen from a startup perspective, the first thing is, okay, is this going to be, at the end of the day, any technology has to be viable. But then you have to develop the technology, and the technology has to solve a problem. And identification of what is the problem that we are trying to solve, that has to be very clearly defined. In this case, when we talk about e-mobility, there's a big push of implementing e-mobility. But on the road, on the ground, there are some fundamental challenges of implementing, for example, charging infra. That is one of the major enablers of e-mobility. So what are the challenges in terms of implementing, a charging infrastructure? I'll give a very, a simple example. The wattage or the load that you have in residence is about 10 kilowatt. Every residence has about a 10 kilowatt load. When you talk about passenger cars, world over, you have a charger that you put, in your residence, and charging happens at residence, and each individual has a charging capability. But in India, if you give a 7 kilowatt charger for passenger cars, how is that going to work, right? So if you are looking at increasing the load from 10 kilowatt to 20 kilowatt at residences, that is a huge impact on the grid. So the question becomes is, how do we solve that problem? How do we, what works in the rest of the world, not necessarily going to work here in India. So how do you create a charging infrastructure at residence? World over, 60 to 70% of the charging happens at residence, right? The balance 20% at offices, because that's where you commute. And generally, when you have to charge a vehicle, you are not going to go to some place to charge. The charging has to be where you are going, and the infrastructure has to be available wherever you are, your daily routine takes you. So the question is really in terms of how do you create the charging infrastructure, and how do you, given the Indian scenario, given the challenges that are existing in India, how do you address that?
That's a very specific infrastructure issue, but I have a question for you all. When we talk about startups, and specifically in context of India and electronic vehicles, there are two things which come to mind. Is India destined to become the biggest market for e-vehicles in future because fossil fuels are finite, and be dominated by Chinese hardware and software? And where the startups coming is that, do startups in India have the potential to make India a leader in the EV market, either through software or hardware? Aditya.
So I think in terms of potential, India has infinite potential. We've got the smartest minds in our country. We've got fantastic infrastructure. We've got the academic institutions to roll out the people who can think of these solutions. Where I think India does lack is to become a leader in any of these markets is we need to be first to market. You look at any of the markets that we're present in, so even mobility, electric vehicles, we're 10 years behind where China is. We're probably a good 7-8 years behind where Finland is. We're a good 5 years behind where the US is. We're not thinking ahead of where the world is. So we're not innovating. We're following. And when you're following, you're never going to be leaders. So when India says that we want to be the leaders in electric mobility, it is just saying that we have a mass population which can adopt this. We happen to be the world's leaders in terms of two-wheelers.
That's not innovation, that's market.
Exactly. It's marketing. So it's not innovating. So if we want to be leaders in any one of these future technologies, we need to be innovating before. And we need to come out with something which is revolutionary. That's probably not going to be electric mobility, but we can build layers on top of it. So the advantage is that it's a market which is ripe for innovation. We can think out of the box. We don't need to be limited by the fact that this is, and I'll tell you in terms of batteries. So when we talk about lithium-ion batteries, one of the primary constraints is that India has very, very high temperatures. And when people design cooling systems for batteries, they're effectively trying to design this for the batteries which the temperature rises when they're under usage. So you're kind of pushing the heat out from the battery to the ambient temperature. In India, you need a completely different design mindset because you cannot push the heat out because your ambient is only 55 degrees. So now you need to think of how you're going to solve this problem.
But I think that's where the R&D comes in. That's where the innovation comes in, whether it's batteries, whether it's hardware, whether it's components, or any other part of the electronic vehicle.
So if you look at what's happening, just going back to your question, can we be the leader? Yes, of course we can be the leader. And that goes back to what Aditya just said. The requirements that we have are very unique. Worldwide, the battery technology, which is actually a fairly large component of an EV, is is all designed to operate at minus 20 degrees Celsius and it caps at 25 degrees Celsius or 30 degrees Celsius. We start at 30 degrees Celsius, right? So at no point in time, even if you are a late starter, if he actually gets our act together and we have people working on reasonable technology in India, at some point in time we'll get it, right? And our ecosystem will develop in a very different way from the Chinese ecosystem. Because the Chinese are not going to innovate for 55 degrees Celsius. It's people like you and me who are going to innovate it for 55 degrees Celsius. And when that innovation gets there, I do not know whether that innovation is going to get there in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years' time. But we will solve our own problem, right? And when we solve our own problem, we won't have to rely on the imports. Again, you had an earlier question around, where do we see this momentum going? I personally know at least 200, 300 companies in early stage which are working on innovative products. We are slow starters, right? But I've been in the industry for 3 years.
It's like perception. The point I was trying to make is it's perception. Generally, when we talk about e-vehicles, we think of Tesla. We think of a swanky car. But actually, people who are using e-vehicles in India are poor people. You go to the suburbs in Noida and Ghaziabad, any suburb of NCR, the poor people who are actually using the e-vehicles. It's the two-wheeler segment which is going to actually pioneer if we have an electronic vehicle revolution. So the question is that does our startups have the market, the target market in mind? That's where the growth is.
So I think absolutely most of the people that I know are working on two-wheelers and three-wheelers, just for a save a few, right? The market segment is very, very well identified. There is a target market. People are going to market. The e-rickshaw market has just shown the way as how the commercialization can happen. And again, one of the things that has happened about e-rickshaw is it happened without $1 of government subsidy. Yeah, and that's the reason it became a 700,000 market without a single dollar of subsidy. It's again from the same three e-rickshaw manufacturers you would see 600 two-wheeler manufacturers coming. Yeah, and then wait for 5 years. Out of these 600 people, we have around 1,800 e-rickshaw manufacturers. You will get around 600, 700 of them manufacturing two-wheelers within no time. It's already happening. I already know 100 people who are already doing that. Yeah, these 600, 700 of them are going to get scale. Out of these 700 people, I can almost guarantee in 5 to 7 years' time, at least 10 to 20 of them will start manufacturing four-wheelers. That's how innovation comes.
So
right?
You're basically saying that innovation doesn't need to depend on the government of India. Innovation can come from anywhere. So what do we really need to do to curate and improve our market when it comes to innovation in context of startups?
So one very basic key thing which is always missing when we talk about innovation. I have seen company, when we go internationally to any place, you will find innovation happening and they don't to solve a solution rather than getting and jumping into it where they talk about, manufacturing also, marketing also, customer perspective also. So what is important here, the industry and innovation doesn't move in the same direction at the same point of time. They always have a different aspect and philosophy to move forward. Industry thinks from the perspective of how it can be commercialized, how viable it is. One basic challenge what we face from industry perspective is the Indian market or a consumer is so cost sensitive or price sensitive that they are even for an innovation or a better quality, better performance or anything, they are not ready to pay. They always
Isn't that universal? Price sensitivity?
You will find it across the pattern, whether you talk about mobiles, whether you talk about electric vehicles, whether you talk about anything. Commercial is a first sense which definitely comes into the picture. And then comes the problem of if you have innovation also, but you don't have mass, then you will face the price challenge. So these three targets are the important areas which need to be addressed simultaneously. Then only you can reach to a scale, and then you can address the community with the actual solution what they are looking at. But one more thing which always gets missed somewhere is when we see people innovating few things, they deviate from innovation and jump into the other aspect of the business portfolio. Innovation stops there once you start into anything which is, getting into commercialization, quality, production, operations and everything. Innovation need to happen. And I don't feel that there is a timeline for innovation. You see, whether you talk about big companies, whether you talk about Facebook, you talk about, even in today's scenarios, whether you talk about mobile phone, you have innovation happening every single day. So I feel, being into EV sector for quite a long time now, I feel that innovation happens. We started with lead-acid batteries. At that point of time, the lithium-ion cost per kilowatt hour was more than $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now we are talking about somewhere around $250 to $300 per kilowatt hour. Innovation need to keep on happening, and it has to be always an ongoing process. If the innovation stops, everything stops.
Okay, you've spoken about. You can make that point. Where should the startups in India focus when it comes to innovation? Which is the core area where innovation must take place? Is it software? Is it design? Is it batteries? Is it hardware? Where should Indian startups focus?
Shall I answer it?
I can begin with you.
Okay, so I'll start with one of the questions that you talked about earlier. What does customer want? And I'll give you a perspective from commercial vehicle market. And by the way, from target market, we are focused on the three-wheeler commercial. So very, very specific niche target, and we felt that that would be the first one to adopt. But what customer wants, when we looked into it, so they have been already using these Piaggios and Bajaj and Mahindras and all of these vehicles. They have seen what that does. And they want beauty of all of that with new electric vehicle that's coming. And also, whatever fantasies they have read across, so be it the range, Tesla ka truck itna jata hai, so we want that range also. We want that time, that fast charge also. Obviously, they're reading and they don't know what can happen, and they also want the same cost of what the current your three-wheeler vehicles are. So there is definitely a mismatch in terms of what customer wants and what OEMs or startups or anybody can give in the cost. So there is a cost, there is a range, there is a charging time. These are the three things in which you can sort of factor all of these.
If I may interject you, and this is for all of you, is it because of the fact that perhaps in the larger market there is no clear messaging in terms of value attached to an e-platform, e-scooter or an e-vehicle? When we talk about a diesel engine, there's a value attached to it, which is rush, or when we talk about petrol engine, it's the silence of the carburetor which makes a difference. So, hybrid technologies are there. Is it also because of the fact that there is no clear value attached to it? Why e-vehicle? In terms of startup, is it because of cleaner environment? Is it because of less maintenance? Is it because of the fact that, there will be no fossil fuels in 100 years from now? The debate on the value is not there. Do you feel that?
No, I think people are aware in terms of operation and maintenance. They know that, and that's the reason they want electric vehicle. Environment and some of that I think takes a bit back seat when we at least have the commercial vehicle discussion. That's not there. As much as we want. The reason we
you are in the thick of the business. So, what is the clear incentive for any person to buy an e-vehicle, e-scooter?
I think it's very clearly it's just cost of running. So I think it's very simple. It's cost of running, cost of operation maintenance is far lower. I think that's what I would believe is the long-term view. And while in India we're less sensitive to protecting the environment, to ensuring that we've got clean air to breathe, that's probably a bigger incentive overseas. Going back to a question or point that you made, right? So is cost sensitization universal? I don't think it's universal. It's not global. It is very, very specific to India. A lot of countries innovate because they get a premium for that innovation. In India, unfortunately, you don't get a premium for anything. And I think just the infrastructure...
That's a pessimistic view.
It's not pessimistic. I think it's realistic. I think a lot of people over here would agree with that. We all want to develop the best solution. We also want to ensure that we have sufficient margin to deploy back into R&D. What happens in India is because there's so much competition, you're not left with a lot of margin. And someone very senior from the US government actually once told me, it seems like India doesn't like profit. I said, why do you say this? And we do a lot of work in solar. He said, why did your government drive down your cost of solar power from 5 rupees where it was profitable for everyone to 2.34 where it's profitable for no one? I said, because the masses get lower electricity. He's like, yeah, but your businesses don't make money. And if your businesses aren't going to make money, no one's going to reinvest into develop anything new. So you can only take what's already developed and sell it in your country. You're not providing for any sort of capital reserve to deploy into R&D. So that's the unfortunate part, and I think that's where cost sensitization is not.
How can we make it fortunate, the brighter side? Everyone
should get together and decide that this is what bare margin needs to be in any business, and no one's going to drop below this. It's unrealistic.
Piyush, you?
So I actually don't agree on this, right? So I'll have a conversation with him after this because he's my customer and he has not been paying me enough. so that's actually very good.
This is exactly what I said, right? The entire industry operates like this.
Yeah, but again, on a different note, right? So the scale is huge, right? The needs are different. So nobody is going to innovate for India, right? So again, as the industry matures, there's not even a single battery pack manufactured in China which is going to work in India. I can guarantee that. Yeah. And I'm sure Vineet will guarantee that as well because he and I have been talking about it. Those battery packs are not manufactured at 45. The unfortunate thing that has happened for the Indian ecosystem is the day we innovate anything, we get compared with Chinese prices. Those Chinese prices are not for India. They're not for Indian environment. That doesn't work in India. Yeah? That's the unfortunate part.
So basically you're saying that what is also required is awareness when it comes to creation of a product for the Indian market.
It just takes time. Again, there is always an evolution process. Unfortunately, the electric vehicle in India started at the bottom end, right? There are two ways in which adoption happens. Adoption either happens at the top end or at the bottom end. Word over, the adoption happened at the top end and then it came to the bottom end, right? The mindset when you buy a Tesla is very different from a mindset when you buy an e-rickshaw or a two-wheeler for a commercial segment, right? When you're selling it for the commercial segment, it's all about, what is the cheapest product that you can sell because the guys trying to make money. But when you're selling a Tesla or a BYD or a NIO, you're selling at the top end of the customer. That's where the sensitization around the values, whether it is an environment friendly,
that's aspirational. If you talk about
that's aspirational, right?
That's aspirational.
Yeah, and unfortunately in this industry in India, it did not start at the top. The adoption started at the bottom. Imagine a scenario 25 years ago when the mobile phone started and the mobile phones would have started right at the bottom, the industry would have been killed.
So you're saying that the aspirational value is the cure?
The aspirational value will happen. I'm saying, see, what has happened, right? We started at the bottom, we got the volume, and out of this mass, you will get some aspirational brands which are going to come. You just have to wait 3 to 5 years. It's just a natural process of market development. There's no shortcut for this, right? Whether we put in government subsidy, whether we put in new products, it ain't going to happen. The customer needs to mature it, and customer maturity just takes different times in different countries.
No, I think we're really, I'm really running short of time, I know a lot of you will have other points to make, but I'll conclude my session with your point which you wanted to make.
So, a lot of speaking happens when it comes to a commercial perspective. Just to point out a very small differentiation between Indian market and any international market. You will see an apple to apple the same product of Piaggio Vespa, which is running at or selling at 1,000 euros in India. And you will find the same product about 2,500 euros in Europe. Tesla is double or triple the cost in USA as compared to any alternative means of transportation, whether it is compared to a premium hatchback or a premium sedan or a premium SUV. It doesn't happen in India. Very rightly mentioned, the price, it always works on top-down approach, but in India it happens when it starts with the commercial aspect, because when we talk about the saving. We don't talk about something on a long-term perspective. We start from saving, and it is in a gene of an Indian. When you take birth, when your children grow up or whatever, even today we teach our children to save. So with this thought process, when it comes to any segment or any product, you thought of saving money where you can save and then invest. So the whole idea is not about the right product, what you're thinking about, this right product, how we can give a solution to the industry, how we can give a solution to the consumer. A consumer who is already driving a electric, a gasoline vehicle, who is comparing with the day-to-day need of going point to point or using as a mass adaptation, we definitely need to come with a product which has to fulfill the need of the consumer. If we can do that, we will be easily adapted. Whether you see at the end of a e-rickshaw or a kind of upfront, vehicles which can be as lavish as a Mercedes with the electric vehicle or BMW with the electric vehicle. So I think customer, you need to find a solution, and that's what innovation comes.
But I think that will come with time. India might be a huge market, but it's a young market when it comes to choices, And it's not the automobile industry has a huge, long past in India. But I think
electric vehicle is around India for more than 10 years now.
And even in context of the electronic vehicles, in the value which is there in terms of product, the penetration in terms of market, the rural areas, why you would like to shift from a combustible engine to electron. I think that's going to take time. But the bottom line is that this industry is here to stay. Now the issue is, are we in future going to be the leaders of this industry, or we end up becoming a huge market for companies in Europe or China? Are we going to dominate the supply chains, or are we going to be dependent on that? I think that's where the importance of startup come, and I would say that that's what makes you people very, very important when it comes to this sector. So anyway, I think the conclusion which I take away from this session is that yes, challenges are huge, but the spirit of Indian innovation cannot be denied, and I think it's there to stay. Molly.
Those are the crucial takeaways. And